Good morning, everyone. My name is Gordon Cook. I'm the social media director for Thousand Islands Pride Inc. Thousand Islands Pride Inc. is an organization set up to celebrate 2S LGBTQIA diversity in the Thousand Islands region, as well as to celebrate. We also see our mission as to educate. And so this week we are hosting a series of lunch and learns at noon every day. It'll run for approximately an hour or less, depending on how many questions we get. It's also being streamed live on YouTube. And I am very, very pleased to welcome my friend, Maxwell Starshine, who is here to talk to you about his personal experience and connect that to some of the bigger issues of the non-binary community. I am he, him, Maxwell is they, them. So without any further ado, I'll give you my friend, Max.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Maxwell Starshine. Yes, actually. My pronouns are they, them, and I am non-binary. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go over a couple just vocabulary words, terms first, and then I will kind of talk a little bit about my life story and try to educate on what it's like being a non-binary person, using my story to, kind of send you that message. So to begin with, I'm gonna go into the terms like binary and non-binary. So binary is a type of code that is used. It's ones and zeros, and binary basically just means two. So the idea of a binary gender is the idea that there is male and female. Kind of talk a little bit about my life story and try to educate on what it's like being. Gord, we're getting a little bit of feedback.
Yeah, sorry, that was coming through my phone. I've just shut that down.
Okay, all good. So the idea of binary gender is the idea that there's just male and female. Non-binary gender, kind of by extension, is that there's more than just male and female. So that's when you get into identities such as gender fluid, gender queer, agender, bigender. There's a whole lot of terminology that gets used, and it's really up to the person themselves whether, like, what terms they're comfortable with. A term some people might be starting to hear more often is the term NB, which it's spelled ENBY, and it is basically just an abbreviation of non-binary itself. Kind of in the same family of, but not always, is the term transgender. And transgender just means someone whose gender identity doesn't match what sex they were assigned at birth. So because the entire community isn't exactly a hive mind, not all non-binary people necessarily identify as transgender. I personally do. There's really no hard and fast rule for what it means to be trans or non-binary, and everyone's experience looks a lot different. The flip side of transgender is cisgender, and that is when someone's assigned sex at birth matches their gender identity. So my story begins in the woods in the 90s, where there wasn't a lot of anything. There wasn't the nearest house I couldn't even see. I had a sister, well, I have a sister who's 10 years older than me. And it was mom, dad, my sister, and me and the dogs and the wilderness. And my experience was that the clothes that I got were basically the clothes that used to belong to my sister, or, whatever was essentially given to me. I was a child. I did not get much of a choice. And I was kind of let to just be able to play on my own. When I was younger, playing pretend, I would equally play the part of boys and girls. I've always personally been like, nope, gender's just kind of like not for me. even though I didn't necessarily have the words to like describe that experience. I was always, saying like, oh, call me Clark, call me Pippi, call me whatever cartoon I just watched that I really like the character, boy or girl. What I've noticed a lot of recently is a lot of people have used this experience during COVID and the lockdown to really examine their own gender. And a lot of people are realizing that maybe it's not quite so hard and fast as they initially realized. Over the course of my life, I've identified as many different things. I've identified as bisexual, I've identified as pansexual, I've identified as a lesbian, I've identified as queer, as transgender, as non-binary. And that's not because necessarily anything in me changed. It was just that as I began to learn more words that matched my experience more, I would start to self-identify with those words. And it was basically, think of it like a bullseye, where some words are the outer ring. And then I just kind of kept narrowing down until I found the words that that really accurately reflected what I was feeling. When I was 15, I went to my doctor and I asked for a hysterectomy and a double mastectomy. And my doctor said, no, you're too young. Like, what if you want babies? And had no follow-up questions whatsoever about that very specific set of requests. And that was kind of a theme in the earlier parts of my life where there was a lot of, and I mean, like, that's just kind of like the 90s and the early 2000s, right? Where it wasn't as familiar to people. Like, we didn't have trans people on TV. We didn't have trans people in the news. The idea of being non-binary or, gender non-conforming, that really wasn't in like the cultural lexicon. And I have always tried to express myself and tried to express that, like, that's what I was feeling. When I was 17, I told a trusted family friend, I don't want to be a boy or a girl. And his response was to kind of laugh and go, oh, what do we call you, it? And I was like, nope. I just noped right out of like that particular conversation. And I didn't try to come out again until my early 20s because I was really not having it. And anytime I did try to express to adults in my life what I was feeling, it was kind of just chalked up to like teenage low self-esteem, or I don't know. I got this, I would be told things like, this is the most poisonous phrase that was ever said to me. Even though like there's an entire TED talk about it, but someone once told me, oh, fake it till you make it. So I faked gender as hard as I could initially. I threw myself into femininity. And then when I first really came out as trans, and I came out and like with, saying like, I don't identify as male or female, I was treated as though like that's not an option. Like, people were just starting to get the idea of like trans folks, because like there were a couple characters on TV and stuff like that. Like, when I was growing up, the only characters that I saw on TV that were trans that were remotely close to my experience were a villain on Nip Tuck and a victim on CSI. And that's what I got. And it's so hard growing up not being able to identify with anything in the world around me. I didn't know any trans people. I wasn't seeing them on TV. Like, I would scour the library for books with trans characters, but in all of our stories, we tend to become a murder victim at some point. And unfortunately, that is also true in real life. There is a high degree of violence against transgender and non-binary people. And I mean, I know what I look like. I've kind of got like almost like a tropey, stereotypical, like non-binary person look, right? Which is, I've got like the blue hair, I've got tattoos, like I do crazy makeup sometimes, because honestly, like I woke up today and I was like, I wonder what my gender is today. And basically just went through my clothes until I found something that matched. I was like, I think I want to do makeup today, but it's not an everyday thing for me. My gender expression is very, very fluid, and it kind of always has been for at least as long as I've been able to be myself like this. But that wasn't the case necessarily when I first came out. when I first came out as trans and I got that response of, oh, well, like non-binary, like that's not like you can't just have no gender, you can't be both, like anything other. People kind of got the idea of like one-to-one, like a binary transgender person who's female to male or male to female. And I kind of looked at the people in my life at the time and the amount of pushback that I was getting. And I was like, okay, you got me. I'm actually a man trapped in a woman's body. How often have we heard that terminology used when it comes to someone's transition, trapped in another body? I personally don't feel that I'm trapped. I know some people who do, but I think it's too common a narrative. It's not me that's necessarily the issue here, even though I am kind of a lot. I am trapped in a society that has not made any room for my experience. It's starting to. We're getting there. You know, events like this and, you know, the Trans Pride March that happens at Toronto Pride, stuff like that. It's a really good, strong step in the right direction. But otherwise, and it's such a very weird, like Eurocentric mentality too, because there's a lot of cultures, including our own Indigenous culture, that has space for people who are not in the gender binary. A lot of Aboriginal cultures and Asian cultures and some African cultures, they also have, you know, these spaces for people who are, you know, not strictly male and not strictly female. But when I was younger and trying to find out and trying to learn more about myself, like there was this gap in my knowledge about, you know, what that looked like. And I didn't know how to look for the information that I needed, whereas now it's far more readily available. In the beginning of my medical transition, and I'm going to say this with the caveat that not all trans people want to transition medically. Not all non-binary people want to transition medically, and certainly not all people in either category are able to access medical transition. There's still a fair amount of gatekeeping that goes on. Again, this is something that's being worked on. There's more access now than there really has ever been, but especially when I was first coming out. So I said before that I talked to my doctor when I was younger about a double mastectomy and a hysterectomy. That's still been the case as to what I, you know, have wanted to pursue medically. So I lucked out in that I walked into a medical center in Lansdowne when I was 23, and I, you know, talked to this nurse practitioner, and I told her about like the years of depression and anxiety, and all of it went untreated, and how I had, you know, I was really struggling with a lot of aspects of my life. And, you know, I had talked at length with her about all of this, and I was like, I really need to get back on track. Like, I really need to, like, I want to do like medication. I want to go back to college. And then I basically went, oh, and also I'm transgender. And I tucked and rolled for the door. And she said, stop. And then said the words that are bar none the most important words that I have ever heard in my life. She said, I believe you. And then she followed it up with, I've never had a trans patient before. I've never like encountered anything like this. I got to do some homework. And just the fact that she was willing to put in the homework, that I didn't have to sit there and try to convince her. Because in a lot of cases, if someone comes to their doctor saying that they're trans or non-binary and they want to pursue medical transition, they're going to be sent to like a psychiatrist to get an assessment done. So I was diagnosed. So this is where I'm going to start to get a little bit better. Under the DSM-4. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual that is used for identifying any kind of like mental health issue or what have you. So at the time, it was called gender identity disorder. So I've come to my doctor. I've expressed that I'm, you know, transgender. I want to pursue a couple medical transition surgeries, and I want to, you know, try hormone replacement therapy. I get diagnosed with a disorder. The treatment for the disorder is surgery and hormones. But in order to access surgery and hormones, at the time, I had to get a referral to the gender identity clinic at the CAMH in Toronto. I got a 1-page questionnaire. Everybody gets the same questionnaire to basically prove to them that I'm trans enough to get an intake, where I had to go through 3 psych evals to be approved for the treatment to the disorder that they already gave me. So it's a lot of hoops. You'll hear a lot now, especially with younger folks coming out and, you know, experimenting with their gender identity and their gender expression. And the reactionary thing is always like, oh, well, like they're too young to be making that decision. Keep in mind that like I've known since like day dot, but not everyone does. But even then, when it comes to like kids, teenagers, like no one's handing out surgeries. It's not like we're not putting hormones in Pez dispensers here. It's nothing like that. And people get so, well, like children shouldn't alter their bodies. What's going to happen most likely is that they're going to be put on hormone blockers, which is just a pause button for, you know, their secondary sex characteristics to develop. And that is going to give them time to, you know, figure it out. The process for me to get a double mastectomy as an adult with, I mean, also like I had a large chest, so I was also just potentially able to get that done because of like back problems and what have you. The hoops that I had to jump through to go through that, it's not easy. And when people say things like, oh, you know, like you're just doing this for because it's like trendy, nobody's doing this for fun. I mean, it can be a lot of fun. I love playing with my gender expression. It brings me so much joy. I get to find increasingly weird ways to describe myself. Like my general style and aesthetic, I tend to describe as I'm your gay goth barbecue dad. Like it's a whole lot of Hawaiian shirts and a whole lot of weird makeup sometimes, and then man buns on other days. And I have a frankly ungodly amount of shoes. And in, you know, I'm not even going to say in all genders, because you know what, like they're my shoes, I bought them, and I don't have a gender. I will say that like I run into a lot of interpersonal weirdness. So I get the joy of being able to pull out 2 instances from just this past week. I went to go see some live music. I know the musicians. One is a lad that I've known for about a year who has me on Facebook. So he's seen all of my like memes and all of my, you know, educational posts that I make. The other one is a newer acquaintance, and he's also blind. So throughout the course of the evening, when talking to them, the blind one was gendering me female, and the seeing one was gendering me male. They both know better, but it's a common mistake, and it happens. It's hard for some people to get their head around at first. But it was so funny because at the end of the day, I'm like, see, it's not about me, and it's not about how I, you know, project myself. It's not about what I'm wearing. It's not about, you know, my voice or the way I carry myself. It's basically just whoever's interpretation of me. I get kind of divided into whatever is the closest until such a time as I, you know, can sit down with them and really like kind of explain it and talk it out. And I do a whole lot of that. I've been working in the service industry for the last couple of years, and I have gotten no end of people coming up to me being like, hey, so like, not to be weird, but, and I'm like, but you're about to ask me if I'm a boy or a girl. Well, how do you know that? Because it happens to me every day that I leave my house. And in general, I don't mind being that educator. But when I was beginning to transition, it did kind of make me uncomfortable that people were coming up to me and asking me. And like, I was the kid in high school that wore weird costumes to school, specifically so that people would bully me instead of bullying a kid that couldn't take it. So if I was feeling uncomfortable, how was everybody else feeling? And that's really why I got into advocacy and giving, these talks and trying to teach people and trying to really like give people a point of reference by humanizing it. And there's highs and lows that come with that. I've, given presentations to classes at St. Lawrence College, and in the middle of the presentation, got a friend request and a message from one of the students in the class saying that they just kind of figured out something about themselves listening to what I was saying. And there's like no feeling greater than that. On the offhand, I had a Facebook post a little while ago go kind of viral where I just talked about the rule of thumb when you misgender someone. All the post said was, listen, if you misgender someone, your apology shouldn't be longer than the correction. Which means that like, I don't need you to tell me why you've just misgendered me. I don't need you to trip over yourself and apologize 18,000 times. I just need you to correct yourself and move on. So if somebody is talking to me and they're like, oh yeah, no, I was talking to Max and she said it, and I'll say they. You just say they, sorry, they, and then you keep on with your sentence. Pretty simple, innocuous Facebook post. Got shared around 10,000 times. That's the highest reach that I've had a Facebook post hit. And it got to about 7,000 before the assholes and the trolls started filtering in. And then it was just, my inbox was several hundred strangers on the internet telling me to kill myself. So that wasn't awesome. It wasn't my best week ever. I'm no stranger to that kind of hatred on the internet. So it doesn't bother me like as much as it might somebody else. But that can be the response sometimes, and that can be really scary. That kind of response can be why some people don't feel comfortable coming out and don't feel like it's safe for them. In my first year, like out as trans, like I ran into some situations that made me really, really uncomfortable. I, faced threats in public in my town. But the offhand of that is that when I talked about those experiences, I also got a lot of support from the people around me. And they maybe didn't necessarily understand what I was, going through and like what my identity meant. But just that, hey, like I got your back, that can mean so much. When it comes to the topic of coming out, and this is true across the board for any person, any gender identity, sexual identity, anything, a common thing that we hear when it comes to the idea of coming out, well, two things. The first is the idea that it's a singular event. My coming out was as close to a singular event as like you could kind of expect. Like I kind of disappeared off the radar, cut contact with everyone in my life for a couple of years. And I basically came back with a new name and a letter that was just like, here's the deal. Here's what's up with me. You think it's hard for you? There's the door. I've just showed you that I can live without you. And some people took the door. And this is a response that I hear a lot when people say like, oh, well, like you should be able to come out, like, if they love you, they'll accept you. And I'm like, but how stoked are you to find out who in your life doesn't love you? And it's not just a singular moment. It's a constant conversation with the world around us. I'm the most out that I can possibly be, but there are times when I'm a little bit less. Like the other night, I met a woman who, she was quite lovely, met her at the pub during a musician's performance, and she clocked me as trans, but it became very clear very quickly that she thought that I was just male to female trans. She was like, oh, well, I thought you were so beautiful. And then, you spoke and I realized, and oh my God, like you make such a beautiful woman. And I'm like, kind of laughing about it. this woman realistically is going to be in my life for all of 2 hours. So I don't necessarily want to like disrupt my, dinner with my friends to, give her the whole kit and caboodle about, gender identity and being non-binary and such like that. And there are times when I let people misgender me on the basis of, is this going to be more of a headache if I like stop the conversation and try to correct them? Are they going to push back against me? Because sometimes they do. Sometimes they get pretty opinionated about it, especially when it comes to pronouns. So I can't always have that conversation. And like for me, as a person who's that out there, like I'll look like this, for me to have times when I really got to like reserve that piece of myself just for my own safety and well-being, I think it's really important that we become aware that that is an issue. Because like I've got friends who are totally oblivious to that kind of situation. And I've got friends who will step in immediately if they see me uncomfortable, or they'll check in and they'll, be like, hey, is this okay? So I would encourage everyone to, if they see somebody, in that kind of situation, to do a check-in with them. And to, if you know a trans person or a non-binary person, ask them, hey, if someone's giving you a hard time, like, is it okay if I step in your defense? If you're comfortable doing that, if you're able to do that. A lot of my friends that I hang around with a fair amount, they've seen me have to do like the song and dance and the routine, and everybody has basically gotten the grammar lesson a million times. Something that people get that can get quite stuck on is, pronouns. So a couple years ago, people might recall that like the terminology used was preferred pronouns. We're not really using that term anymore. It's just, what are your pronouns? It's not, what are your preferred pronouns? What are your pronouns? Or honestly, because some people are really uncomfortable, like with the idea of, oh, well, like, isn't it rude for me to just like go up and ask that person? If somebody comes up to me and asks my pronouns, it means that they are at least cognizant of, an aspect about myself. That's one less thing that I have to explain. The pushback on the non-gendered pronouns, the singular they, them, is often that it's grammatically incorrect. That's false. We've been using the singular non-gendered they for somewhere around 800 years now. And we use it in language all the time. It's what you use when you don't know the gender of someone, essentially. We're just asking you to use it intentionally for us. And people really sometimes can struggle with that. Once I start giving examples, though, it becomes a lot easier for them. If I'm just like, oh no, someone forgot their phone, I really hope that they come back for it. Slides right off the tongue. But people can get a little hung up on the idea of referring to folks like me specifically with that. It's like, no, it means plural. It's like, it doesn't. Also, my name is a pronoun. If you're stuck on the they, them, you can just say Max and be like, I was talking to Max and Max told me that. Or I was talking to Max and they said that. A lot of fields actually do use the singular they as non-disclosing language, like a lot of medical fields or fields where you have client confidentiality. For instance, if I was a caseworker for someone and was reaching out to another organization on their behalf, the conversation I'd probably have is, hey, I've got a client that's interested in some of your services. They were wondering if you can send them an information packet and, they'll get back to you about whether or not they're going to follow through with this. It's language that we use all of the time. And it's a hard adjustment at first. I'm going to be honest with you. Some people have a hard time getting their head around it because we're not used to using it that actively. It's a similar thing that happens when people change their name. So my mom's on this stream. Hi, Mom. Mom, swore up, down, sideways all through her pregnancy that that she was going to have a boy. And what she started saying afterwards is like, and then surprise, you were a girl. And I was like, plot twist, I'm neither. And also, I'm not a huge fan of the name you gave me. So I'm just gonna pick a new one. And while I don't have a whole lot of acquaintances that I've been going by Max in some capacity, online or offline, essentially since I was 14, I'll say 14, 15. People will sometimes, if I like run into like cousins or what have you, they'll be like, oh, but like I knew you as blank for so long. And I'm like, yeah, I knew me as that for longer. And I still managed to not, I don't know. And then my mom can figure it out. There was really like, there was some struggles with the pronouns at first, but otherwise, like the name kind of came pretty easily. So if my mom can figure it out, you can figure it out. And like these are very, very common headaches and roadblocks that we run into. Like there were aspects of my family that asked incredibly inappropriate questions, and not in good faith, and then basically just had nothing to do with me. And I personally, like, I've got a weddings and funerals type of family, so I'm just like, all right, see ya. But I've also known people where like it has really, really been a point of contention within their family, and that's that hurts my feelings. I think people should do better on that one because we're just doing our best out here. I wouldn't necessarily. No, I'm going to be way more definite on that statement. Actually, I don't regret any part of my transition. And I say that as someone that used to be a large breasted, like gray eyed, chick with pretty solid legs, like that would have been easier. Like I was blonde. It would have been easier for me to be that. I wouldn't have dealt with half the hardship that I've dealt with, or like any of it. But I constantly wanted to climb out of my own skin. This is why I don't necessarily like the idea of the trapped in the wrong body, because I kind of dissociated myself from my body to a point where I think of it like I think of my car. Like I put stickers on it. When something's broken, I remove it. And it kind of needs new speakers. And that has followed me. But the more that I do to make the outside match the inside, the more that I feel like I am myself. And like it's caused issues in relationships and what have you. Like figuring out my sexuality based on my gender is kind of like a game of Battleship at this point. The very quick and dirty way that I say it is like my gender is no, my sexuality is yes. I kind of don't, like, I personally am just like, it's the person that but there's a weird like arithmetic that has to happen in my brain when I'm, thinking about like attraction or asking someone out, where I got to think like, okay, so am I into this girl in like a masculine way or a feminine way? Am like, where am I in my gender in relation to this person? Because when you talk about these interpersonal relationships, it's always within, like, you exist in relation to another person. It was a situation where like my sister, refers to me as her sibling. My mom will refer to me as her youngest or her child. And it's awkward because she's in the chat, but like, deal with it, mom. At first, she said things that a lot of trans people hear from their parents, and that is the the line, I'm mourning the loss of my child. We get that a lot. Non-binary people and trans people, just in general, like we do hear that a lot. And it's not a good sentiment. It makes sense in some capacity. You'll have parents, you'll have siblings and what have you that are having to reconcile that the version of me that they knew is like wasn't real. And that comes down to perception, right? That comes down to, the same reason that I get gendered male or female in the space of literally 2 minutes, because it's not about me, it's about your perception. That kind of mourning mentality, for any parents, I would encourage you to drop that, because that's really, really harmful, because it is kind of a mind trip that a lot of us have to go through, where we are both simultaneously a murder victim and the one that murdered us. And that is difficult to really work with. It's also such that when we come out, our relationship to people around us has to change. I have a niece and I have a nephew. And, I went from auntie to uncle for a second when I had to really identify more as just a trans male in order to, get my surgery and what have you. And then now I kind of lost that honorific. And there was a part of me that was like, well, what am I now? What am I to these people who I care about, that I love, that I helped take care of when they were younger? They're some of the closest family members to me. If I lose that idea of aunt or uncle, where does that leave me adrift? My personal response to that was that they call me captain. It's a non-gendered phrase, if people say, oh, Mr. or Miss, and I'm like, Captain, it's Captain Starshine to you, and we're good from there. And I'll playfully kind of gender myself some ways in language, just by using phrases where, I'll say hey, not to be that guy, but, stuff like that. But that's not, really changing what exactly my identity is. And this interplay of where we are in our relationships also comes out in obviously in romantic relationships in a different way. Everyone that I've dated since I came out as trans has had some kind of a hang up at one point. Not at first. At first, they're always fine with me. They're always accepting of my identity. The problem comes when they start to think about what my identity means for them. So if they are identifying as cisgender and heterosexual, and they are dating somebody who is non-binary, I'm not saying you're not heterosexual. I'm just saying sometimes there's exceptions to the rule. Generally, I don't like cake that much, but sometimes someone puts a cupcake in front of me and I'm like, all right, I'm not going to say no. It's not something I go out of my way for, but hey, it's there. And this is not been great for me personally as far as my dating life goes. Because it basically ends up in a whole lot of does this make me gay? Or the flip side was, I don't want my parents to think that I'm straight because I'm dating you, because I fought so long for them to think that I was a lesbian, that to accept my identity as a lesbian, that they'll really just walk it back if I'm dating a trans person. So, and that never happens at the onset. It's never first thing, because that's a red flag relationship wise. It's we get several months in, and then suddenly my boyfriend is going to Pride with me as an ally. And I'm like, you kind of have a pony in this race, boy, but all right. And a lot of us kind of deal with that. And we also get told, basically, just date other trans people. Cool. There's 12 of us in Brockville, and 7 of them are teenagers. So like, I'm picky. I don't know. I'm also a lot. It happens. There's this constant reality of having to navigate the world around me, and like I'll run into things like the broadside of a barn sometimes that I didn't even realize was, you know, an issue, or that was gonna, like, I didn't know that everyone I dated was gonna suddenly like have an existential crisis because they were dating me. It's like I'm too busy with my own existential like shenanigans. But I am at a point where I'm going to pull out a quote, actually. There's this actor, Wentworth Miller, who came out as gay a couple years ago. And for a while, he had a Facebook page where he would write these essays. And in one of his essays, he talked about how important it was for him to come out and like what that looked like within the acting industry. And there was a quote in that essay that was so powerful, where he said, "If it comes down to a choice between me loving all of me and others loving certain select parts of me, there is no choice." And that has sat with me. I think I first read that in like 2017. That has sat with me almost every single day, to the point where I have it written on a piece of paper that is taped beside my bathroom mirror, so that I wake up every morning and I see that and I am reminded, because there are times when like this is tough. I feel so happy and grateful for like kids these days, because there's a lot more knowledge and a lot more support around it. Because like I got out here by myself and I was pretty much like, it's just going to be uphill the whole way, like the whole time. And this is coming from somebody that has like a terminal case of like main character syndrome, where I have to be like playing this game on difficulty mode like all the time. It is very, very important to acknowledge and validate people and their, you know, their gender expression. And I also encourage people who have felt that they were cisgender their entire lives to think about why. It's worth it to think about why. Since we are at the 45-minute mark, I'm going to do a check-in and see if there are questions. I don't know what's going on the YouTube side of things, so.
Me neither. I had to shut that down. Can you hear me, Max? Yeah, I had to shut that down because of the feedback. So,
Okay.
can I have been overwhelmed by your talk. It's been great. Can I ask a couple questions?
Of course, shoot.
Good. Okay. Early on, you said, you know, the idea that people say, "Well, I'm trapped in this body," and you turned it around and said, "No, I'm trapped in a society that doesn't relate well to this body." And you know, you have chosen to live in Brockville.
It was
You know
kind
what
of
I'm
more
saying?
circumstance than anything else. It was not my first pick.
Okay.
You can blame
All right.
you can blame the other woman in the chat for that one.
Okay. Yeah, fine. But I mean, Brockville has its own very special. How do I say it without? You know what I'm saying? The Brockville is a very conservative town. If you lived at the corner of Church and Wellesley, your life would be different.
Yes, absolutely.
How is it? How do you deal with living in Brockville, or say Gananoque Way, or someplace rural and?
So like I've hopped around in a couple different cities over my life. Like I lived in Crosby growing up, which is like, sometimes people are just like, "Oh, you have to understand, like I don't get this stuff. I'm from the sticks. I'm like from Prescott." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm from Crosby." Like if you have a stop sign or like lights, you're not the sticks as much as I was. And then it was like Kingston, and then the mountains of Quebec, and then Brockville, and then Kingston again, and Ottawa, Lansdowne, Gananoque Way, Orleans. Unfortunately, I can't afford to be single in Toronto. Otherwise, I would totally be there. It was really circumstance that brought me back to Brockville after I'd been away for several years. And I was disheartened by the response in town. And, people will say like, most of the people in town, I'm sure, are just like kind of ambivalent. Like they don't actively care. Some people are like going to be jerks about it. And I do have a lot of people in my corner, but it just takes one person to end my life, essentially. Like you can have a population of 22,000 people and it's 21,999 can have nothing to say about it, but it's really the one that causes a bit of an issue. And it's been a struggle. And the only thing that has really made me feel, because like I had to give myself some kind of power because I felt very powerless here. I felt very much like I'm trying to take control of my life. I'm trying to take control of my body. How do I, and like that kind of informed the, giving lectures at schools and organizations. Like I've talked to the health unit, I've talked to the PR people for the Air Force. Someone did their entire master's thesis about me. And that's the thing where I feel like I'm doing it because I'm like, you're the first trans person that I've ever met. You're the first non-binary person I've ever met that I've like heard. I'm like, the next guy, the next girl, the next pal, they do not have to deal with it quite so much. And that's really what does it, to the point where even, I had a friend who I was, pretty close to their parents, come out to me before they even came out to their parents. And there was this sense of relief of like, thank God I started that conversation for them. Thank God. Because can you imagine what that would have looked like for them if they were walking into it blind, just knowing like my own struggle with like having to deal with like my family and my friends and everything else. So that's kind of how I deal with it, where like I said, main character syndrome, I kind of just treat it as like a side quest challenge where it's like, if I have to be trans here, then I have to make it better for trans people so that when I leave, it's like they're not going to have to deal with that much nonsense.
Well, that's a wonderful thing to hear. Do you have your chat window open? I know
Yes,
you said
I
you're
do.
new to this because
Yes,
your mom has a question.
my mom has a question. So my mother's question is, Max, can you speak about the struggle of friends who support, but when it suits their view, they view you as either male or female? Yes. So that is a thing. I have encountered plenty of people that are kind of supportive to my face, and then that kind of goes away as soon as either I step out of line or they decide that it suits them, or they forget, or they get drunk, or whatever. Like some of the weird thing, like justifications for like gendering me is people are like, "You're pretty," and I'm like, "Look, I was like an ugly duckling, like all through everything. Like I quit gender and like leveled up, and it sucks that apparently I became attractive like the hot second that I kind of stopped caring about it." And that is a weird justification for people to assign a gender to me, let me tell you. Yeah, those people aren't friends. Like I've gotten to a point where if you can't, again, if it is a choice between me loving all of me and others loving certain highly select parts of me, there is no choice. And that means that I can be very alone sometimes. But I would rather that than the constant fight of just trying to prove to everyone who I am and then realizing like you're not listening to me. And I get these weird phenomena where, people, like I said earlier, people tend to like kind of divide the difference where men will generally, well, the longer my hair gets, the more like up in the air this is. But dudes tend to gender me male and women gender me female. And so I suddenly like get caught between like bro rules and like chick rules, which like a recent, issue. Well, actually, this has been like the whole time where people will be like, oh, well, like, why were you talking to my ex-boyfriend? And it's like, okay, that's a weird straight culture thing. Like in, in LGBTQ land, we rather famously, because it's such a small dating pool, somebody's going to be somebody's ex. And it's like, I've just like violated like girl code, but I'm not a girl. And I've had to like try to convince people of that. And it really gets me nowhere, and it ends up being wasted energy. There has to be a point, like I've let it go on too long in some situations where I've just let people disrespect me. I and in part that was like due to circumstance, like it was friends that I also worked with, or it was just people that I was around a lot. And I was like, you want to know what? If like 95% of the time they get it and 5% of the time they don't, like it's probably fine. But even at 5%, if it's years, that's pretty willful. Like if you just met me and you mess up once or twice, like I'm not going to drag you. But if it's years of just actively ignoring this piece of me that is so important and is so special, and that you'll get people where it's like, well, why do you got to make it all about being trans? And I'm like, because I'm all trans. All of it. Yep, it's on my mind like pretty often, Another question from my mother is about surgery. I will be honest right now, given COVID things and whatnot, I don't know what the surgery landscape looks like. When I transitioned, I was sent to the one clinic in Canada that was covered by like OHIP. Now there's a lot more options available in Canada for surgeons who do gender confirming surgery. I believe the process is still that if you want to get medical coverage through OHIP, you still have to go through the CAMH. Otherwise, I've known people that have gone private and have, gone to, clinics that are like set up like specifically, for gender confirming surgeries. Where I ran into like a very frustrating thing was that like I just wanted a double mastectomy and a hysterectomy, and I had like a doctor in Kingston who was ready to rock. He was like, "Yep, set of boobs is a set of boobs. Let's get them off you." And I was not allowed to pursue that option at the time because they wanted to send me to one of the specialty clinics. I'm like, if it was one of the specialty surgeries, that would have been one thing, but it wasn't. It's literally just, and as people can see from the invite, I elected not to retain my nipples. So I had no nipple placement situation. I didn't have to have any kind of specialty follow-up for it. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I apparently am Wolverine. I just like healed from it all super fast. So that worked out well for me, but other people have been like laid out for weeks. Talking to your doctor is a good first step. And if your doctor doesn't listen to you or doesn't believe you, find a new doctor. But also a handy medical tip, if a doctor ever declines to address a concern of yours, something that you can ask for and you should ask for is, okay, I would like it noted in my chart that I approached you with this and you declined to pursue it. Because then you'll find some doctors become far more accommodating when they face the specter of a later malpractice suit. There are resources available, like I believe Rainbow Health Canada, that have things that are directories to surgeons and clinics, and a lot of the regulations as far as like prescribing hormones have opened up quite a bit. And yeah, shall we wrap this up, Gord?
Yeah, I don't really want to, but I know you've got to go to Ottawa.
I do.
This was the most amazing hour I have spent in a long time. Well, maybe Saturday night listening to James. That was pretty amazing too. But anyway, if the rest of our Pride Week lives up to the high bar, I'm mixing metaphors here.
Yeah.
Lives up to gets over the high bar that you have set, I will be so pleased. I am so happy to have been a part of this. I think this needs to be shared. I don't, we only had a couple of people on. Roger was there for a while, but I'm going to do my best to share this, the YouTube stream, whatever, because there was so much in there, so much. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if you need anything, call me, text me, Facebook, whatever. And I am very pleased to call you my friend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for inviting me on and giving me the space to talk. As just kind of like an addendum note, if you or anybody else watching now or later on has questions, my name is Maxwell Starshine. I'm like the easiest person to find on the internet, and I can be contacted, and I'm generally pretty open to having a chat with anybody.
Thank you. I wish there was a way to sort of, roll some credits or something. I don't have any credits, or to kind of fade to black.
Yeah.
I don't. The only thing I can do, I think, is click on this button that says end.
Yep, pretty much.
And I'm going to do that.
All right.
Thank you so much. We will see you soon.
Of course.